All right. Good afternoon. I'm Doug Floyd, if you haven't had me before in the course. And this is just a little short introduction to our history class this year. I unfortunately will not be there Thursday for the first class. And so I recorded a little video that gives us an introduction to the class. And hopefully everyone has a syllabus at this point. And I'm not going to go in detail over the syllabus. I will say that you can, the text, the required text, Western Civilization Beyond Boundaries, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I put 6th edition. I have the 7th edition, and you could buy an earlier edition. There are some small variations between the chapters, but you'll get the gist of what you need in whatever edition you're able to purchase. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about right now the class and some of what we'll do, but also I'm going to talk about just the topic we're on. So we're on a topic that we've called world history, which gives us a question. The first question is, what is history? How do we think of history? And it could be seen as I don't know, maybe a boring topic of which it could easily become boring if depending on the kind of details you might focus on of maybe the development or time period of any particular thing, person, place, community. So one way of thinking about history is just thinking about your family. And so you already have a built-in history in your head, even if you don't have it written down. If I ask you about your family, where are you from? Where are your parents from? Or I might ask how your parents got together. I might ask a series of questions, which you may or may not have the answers to, but there is some kind of story in a sense behind it. But there's also a series of maybe events or what almost seem like random events. There might be a series of encounters across your lifetime, your parents' lifetime, that are now remembered in the form of a story. When they happened, were they a story? That's a good question. I mean, if you think of your life, think of yesterday, what you did yesterday, the day before. Would that make an interesting story? Maybe, but it might be, depending on what you did, it might be kind of boring. If you just think of the course of the day and what you do during the day, there are some things that could be thought of in a story, but it's going to involve editing. See, we're going to have to cut some things out. Just watching you sleep for however many hours could be rather boring. So we edit down and we take certain events and we begin to remember them, piece them together in sort of a story. And there is sort of a story there. And sometimes we, in the process of pushing that story together, we might overemphasize certain things and underemphasize other things, but that gets us to a story. Which is a little bit easier for us to think about and remember. And so, in a sense, the study of history is the study of how people remember. So we all remember different ways. And so, in one sense, the way we look at history is often changing in a sense. Sometimes it's because history itself is changing. You say, well, how could the past change? Well, maybe we're learning how to research better. We're learning more about the past, all sorts of possibilities about how history might change. What happened in the past may not have changed, but the way we remember it might change. And certainly the way people have remembered certain events in history across the ages has in fact changed. So we're going to look at that a little bit, and we're going to think about what we've called Western history. But now, once again, let me think about this topic I think the title of the course is World History. But once again, we're going to think specifically the textbook I've given you is we're going to look at a series of events that happen in one part of the world and what we primarily would call maybe the Middle East now. Okay, there's 3 big areas we're going to begin to look at, and those 3 big areas are still around, but we may not use the same name. So we're going to look at Egypt. Egypt still is called Egypt, and it's still there today. And it's a nation. It's in northern Africa, now it's primarily an Arabic nation, but it doesn't have quite, or a Coptic sometimes, which is slightly different than the rest of the Arabic nations. and it has a certain kind of way it's run that is very different than it was run in the past. But you have Egypt; it's still there, and there are elements from Egypt which you may already be familiar with, like the pyramids that are there that were there in the ancient past. And so Egypt is an ancient empire. It's not the same empire it was, but the ancient empire we're going to look at. So that's one of the great places we begin with when we talk about the beginning of Western history. Another place is what's called Mesopotamia. We'll look at Mesopotamia, and that is primarily where Iraq is, but also kind of Turkey, Syria. So Mesopotamia, one of the most ancient places on earth, is Mesopotamia, and the cultures that came out of Mesopotamia. So we're going to be looking at that, and then we'll also look at Persia, which has a great cultural history, art and beauty and what have you. And where is Persia today? Well, Persia, the country that is where Persia was is Iran. And so there's a great long history in that part of the world that reaches back to some of the earliest parts of civilization. And we're going to follow that track as it moves west. So we can't study everything. And particularly when we meet only one day a week, we are limited in what we can do in an hour, particularly when I want to engage each of you in discussion. So I will ramble on a bit like I'm rambling on right now, but I will also be inviting you into the discussion. And I actually want your responses, your thoughts, your insights. Part of the way I understand teaching and the way I think about a class is we are learning together. I've taught history multiple times, and each time I teach Western history or world history, I see it with fresh eyes. And how do I see it with fresh eyes? I see it through your eyes. So I'm learning from you, even as you're learning from me, or as I'm provoking your learning, you might say. We're provoking one another, and hopefully in a good way. We're provoking one another to learn and to discover, because this is exciting. I actually love to discover things about history and about the world. And so it should be fun. We shall have fun. And so every time I've taught this course, I've taught a different course, even though it's the same course, meaning you can't step in the same, how does that go? You can't step in the same creek or same river twice. Everything's changing. So I'm changed from last time I taught this. You're changed. And you weren't even my class several years ago, but we're all changing. And as a result, every time we encounter these ancient stories, we're seeing them with new eyes. We're seeing them in different ways. And so our discussions will provoke thoughts, and there are things you'll be interested in and things you won't be as interested in. And that's okay, because I'm going to talk about how to follow that track of the things you're interested in, which actually connects us to maybe how do people even research history? Okay, so how do people do it? There's all sorts of tools that people use, and people, in one sense, follow their interests. Some people like rocks, and rocks become a way to study history. So I just watched a little documentary on Alfred the Great, which I'm going to give you the show. It's called Time Team. You can watch, if you want to watch the first episode. Time Team is Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Prime, and the first episode is on Alfred the Great, and they're looking at a plot of land in England where they believe Alfred the Great hid from the Viking, or not. He hid from the Vikings, but it's where he learned to. He sort of ended up coming up with a strategy that would both win him his kingdom back and eventually prepare the way for a modern England. And so one of the people they bring in is they find this big old rock, but it actually is not a rock as in something that's come out of the earth. It's sort of what's left over from ironwork. And they bring in a man whose specialty is that. That's what he likes to study. So if you can imagine, he studies pieces of what appear to be rock, but help date and track different periods of history. And so he can use that to determine what was being done on the land in that time. And it actually helps them understand sort of the development of civilization across English history and in any history. So that man likes to study rocks. So you can approach history from any thing that can yield a story. So some people are like archaeology; they study some very aspects of archaeology. His would be a form of archaeology, uh, but other people might like languages, so they study. I particularly like. Uh, the history of the Celts from the 5th to 9th century. It's something that fascinates me. So, how do you study that? Well, you can listen to a lot of popular stories about it, but you can also read things that were written in that period. So, people did write uh, poetry and songs and stories, and most of it was in some poetic form. So, I can study that. That's a way of doing historical work. I can look at the. You can see behind me these little crosses. Is a Celtic cross, um, and I have a series of icons. There's one behind me right there. A series of icons of various Celtic saints. So their story, they have a story, and their crosses tell a story. So these are ways of doing history. So there's all sorts of ways of doing history, and there's all sorts of topics. And as we proceed, I hope that you'll find something you're particularly interested in. It could be the history of shoes, the history of fashion. I think I had a student pick up the history of fashion once in the medieval times. Um, or actually it was specifically the history of fashion in the theater in the medieval times. How about that? Um, the history of hip hop, the history of chewing gum. I don't know, anything. Any topic could be something that you might want to research yourself, and that will become your personal project this semester. And you will do your own historical work, and I'll help you think about how to do that. And this will be a good way to get your hands wet and or dirty or clean, depending on what it is you study. If you study the history of soap, it would be, of course, getting your hands clean. So we'll look at that on how people do history, and I'll also introduce you to some programs like I just mentioned. Time Team. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's quite it's just an interesting little show that takes one little historical thing and gathers together some archaeologists, and they do research on it. There's another show that I like that is on YouTube, and I will try to send you the link, called Connections. This show was done in the 70s and 80s, so it's been around a long time. But what he tries to do is find connections across a long spectrum of time to see how we got to modern technologies. And so sometimes you'll be surprised at how some of these technologies came about. The modern computer, if you work its way back, you can get all the way back to the Roman aqueduct system, which is pretty fascinating. So that's an interesting, could be for some people, a very interesting time travel. Now, in taking this class and in doing homeschool, most of you already know this to begin with, but homeschooling is really a form of self-education. It is, hopefully, if you do, and being a homeschool student, you become a person who educates yourself, that you will do throughout your life, a self-educated person. Of course, you have your parents right now provoking you, and other teachers may be stirring you and provoking. But at the end of the day, uh, this is a form of self-education, a lifelong habit. So it's great to go ahead and to develop the disciplines that require self-education now, that you learn how to do things now. So reading the text is something you have to do on your own, and we're not going to talk about everything in the text every week. I will give you assignments that will help you uh, to try to remember some of the key details. So one of the things is when you read a chapter is to follow those timelines and to be able to talk about the timelines in the chapter. And every chapter will have several timelines, and to be able to understand those timelines and really learn those timelines, probably to recreate them on another piece of paper for your own personal study, and be prepared to talk about them and give just a quick summary of whatever it is they talk about. That's one good self-education habit as you read these chapters. And it's easy to not read chapters. I was a student once. I know all the things students do, so it's easy not to do the work. But to become a self-educated person, it's really a great habit. So there were classes in high school that I found the easiest way through, and later in life, I had to go back and retrace my steps because I needed some of the things I overlooked before. So I would encourage you to read the chapters and follow some of the instructions I'll give you on preparing. Each week, I want you to be sort of prepared with those timelines because we'll talk about them in class, and class time will be focused on discussing these things. And I am not simply going to talk, although I could talk the whole time. That's not my intention. My intention is that we will have a robust discussion, and you'll try to talk about things you remember, things you like, things you didn't understand, and that sort of thing. And there'll be some quizzes that are involved. I put 3 timeline quizzes across the semester, so 6 for the year. And so I'll explain that a little bit more as we get closer to the first one. Just every month, just about a little over a month, we'll do a quiz just to help keep our minds fresh on what we've studied so far. Quick review is a way of doing it. I'll ask you to do some essays, very short, just a quick 1 page. I'll ask a question. Usually that comes out of a class discussion. Something will prompt my mind. So I don't have an essay for you right now. I don't have a list of essays, but I will give you an essay. And this is not an English class, so we're not worried about the most perfect writing. What I'm worried about is you just trying to think through the question. Because what I want you to do is begin to think through some of these questions about how you ask questions about history and your response to history. And that also, another way of preparing for that are journal entries. And so the journal entries can be a way you write about things on the timeline, your response to things, questions you have. Just keep a little journal. And from time to time, I may ask you to bring the journals to class so that we can talk about those. And of course, I mentioned the personal project. And that's where you will do your own research on something. And then I put a take-home exam. This sounds like a lot of things, but the whole goal in this particular class is to help you remember some key details so that in the future, when you are tested on this, and whatever forms of testing you may have outside of this class, maybe some of this will stick. Not all of it's ever going to stick. Every time I'm relearning. We're always relearning. So we're learning and relearning. And that's what I'm inviting you to do this semester is learn and then be prepared to relearn and maybe learn some tools for relearning. Learn some tools as to be a self-educator so that when people talk about history, you've already got some little background. You might be able to locate a period and you might know some things that can add to the conversation. And then again, you might at least have the tools to go do research. And then you might challenge some of the things people say, because just because somebody is a talking head on TV or anywhere about a particular historical event, they may or may not have all their ducks in a row, so to speak. So let's see if there's anything else in the class. I printed out the little syllabus. I think it should be self-explanatory, but I'm going to ask you to email me if you have questions or talk to me next week. So I won't be there this week. I will have someone in class, and I'm going to send out a little questionnaire to you, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and try to fill that questionnaire out before the first class. And then you guys can discuss it. And I'm also going to ask you to email me that questionnaire. So that I can that can help me, but also that'll help the class have a first discussion, and then for the next class you're going to read chapter 1. So for August 25th. So this week all I ask you to do is watch this video, fill out that questionnaire, and bring it to class as well as email it to me. All right. I look forward to teaching you this semester, and I look forward to learning from you as well. Blessings.